Part 2 of session 53. Let's finish talking about close encounters, but now related to awakening. Let's begin. Before we get started, I want to give you a reminder that if you're not aware, I have timestamps in the timeline here, so you can skip to the question that you want if you're watching this again, or if you're interested in a specific question because you have read it and you want to get to that question, or if you need to go back to the question that I was discussing, and then you can simply navigate the video a lot better. So I never mentioned that, and it's in all my videos, and I think it's a pretty useful feature if you're exploring the different parts of the session. So with that out of the way, we have a very bright day. I felt like mentioning this because I cannot control too much the brightness here. Good thing I'm not into lighting environments and stuff like that, because I'm not really good at this, but that's because the sun is out. Strange, because where I live it's very overcast most of the time, but also we have snow, and the snow reflects the sunlight and it's kind of blinding, but hey, I enjoy it. So in any case, with that out of the way, we can get into a little recap in session 53 when they were talking about close encounters. And there's a question I will reread that was in the last video, so this will put us into context. Where 53:11, where Don asked, why does this occur, referring to the close encounters of wanderers with negative oriented entities, or Orion group. So Ra said when it occurs, it is quite rare and occurs either due to the Orion entity's lack of perception of the depth of positivity to be encountered, or due to the Orion entity's desire to attempt to remove this positivity from this plane of existence. Orion tactics normally are those which choose the simple distortions of mind which indicate less mental and spiritual complex activity. So since we were talking about close encounters and what they mean, what's behind all this, Don wanted to know why some wanderers get these close encounters or experiences, this UFO contact with, or so-called UFO contact. I have my say on this, which I'll express again. I said it in the last video. But why does this happen to wanderers? Wanderers who came here, obviously positive. Why do they contact, or they get contact with Orion group entities? So the reason is that, first, they said there's a couple of reasons. Either the Orion group has a lack of perception of how positive the being is, or they want to remove their positivity from basically this reality, and is very much what the Orion group entity of 5th density negative was doing to the contact, the raw contact, when they were literally just bothering and annoying everybody in LL research there by annoying Carla, her body. And in any case, there's a lot of speculation there too as to, what happened afterwards and so on, but I'm not going to get into that. So that puts us into question 12, which is continuing to ask about this Confederation contact and Orion group contact, and we can go into that right away. So let's get this moving. There we go. Alright, so Don in question 12 follows up and says, I have become aware of a very large variation in contact with individuals The Confederation, I'm assuming, uses a form of contact to awaken, as you say, wanderers. And could you give me general examples of the methods used by the Confederation to awaken or partially awaken the wanderers they are contacting? Really good question. Ross says the methods used to awaken wanderers are varied. The center of each approach is the entrance into the conscious and subconscious in such a way as to avoid causing fear and to maximize the potential for an understandable subjective experience which has meaning for the entity. Many such occur in sleep, others in the midst of many activities during the waking hours. The approach is flexible and does not necessarily include the close encounter syndrome, as you are aware. So, let me try to give you an illustration, or a diagram rather, of how I see this happening in general. We're talking about the positive contact with wanderers to awaken them. So chances are, if you're here, that you've had some sort of experience of some kind that kind of ignited you to seek, to follow your heart, to question things and so on. What we call awakening, you know, awakening from the dream. There are many dreams, there are many levels of the dream, but this first awakening is, you know, the pillar stone. Questioning, finding truth. And so the diagram that I want to make is that there is the energy, I want to call it energy, the positive energy, which is attracted to the wanderer because of its vibration. This positive energy manifests as thoughts, as perceptions, as images. And of course, this generates feelings in the individual. So this positive energy is really attracted. However, there is the paramount free will of the entity, which makes up the subconscious mind, mostly, and the conscious attention of the individual. And so there needs to be a sort of, if you didn't call me, I won't be there. But if you're subconsciously calling me, then something must happen. And this is where it gets sort of mixed with the Orion group, possibly, with contact and what we call close encounters. Now remember, these words that we were using back in the 80s, they were referring to the, I mean, LNL research was pretty advanced for their age, of course, for their era. But there were still, obviously, leftovers of phrases that to me don't make much sense now, like close encounter. Funny enough, Ram mentioned that joke that, you know, are not all encounters close when everything is one, or something like that. Ram made a better joke. Last video. Go watch it. But in my view, close encounter to me kind of reverberates the idea that there are UFOs that land and somehow we get in contact with the physical separation that is between the UFO and the ET coming, walking down that brilliant light and so on. That to me is what close encounter sounds, and I want to kind of demystify that by using this diagram, especially us who have a clearer understanding of how things work energetically, and called by the will of the individual. So we were in the diagram of positive energy, in this case, being attracted to the entity that somehow calls for it. And as it calls for it subconsciously, it will sort of manifest. And this is what we would call close encounter, which is funny because actually Ra says the approach is flexible and does not necessarily include the close encounter syndrome, as you're aware. I love the word syndrome there because it seems to be like a specific type of contact that, you know, and this is why I like to also put under the umbrella, oh, I had a mystical experience. I had a revelatory dream. I was meditating and had a huge download. I took psychedelics and had what a trip on, into space and all of this. I mean, there's a myriad of mystical experiences, let's just call it that, that are triggered. And I've had several of these, actually. I had the dream type, I had the psychedelic one, I've had it in meditation. I mean, it happens often. So to me, it's just this permeability that exists between your subconscious and the roots of the mind that bring about this positive energy that is always saying the same thing. If you were to listen to all the accounts of mystical experiences under the umbrella that I just talked about, you will hear that the common ground is always, I felt loved, I felt one with the universe, I felt that entities wanted to help me, and so on. Why do we see entities? Why do we see forms? Because it's our subconscious that is creating these forms. And these molds, let's call the subconscious like a mold for the images and perceptions that we're going to have. These molds will obviously shape our experience. And so when we finally get the permeability to this energy to flow into our subconscious, we get this flashing experience. And this is what would incite the awakening. Now listen to what Ross says. The methods used to awaken wanderers are varied. So, under the umbrella, there are many ways in which we can permeate your subconscious, basically. The center of each approach is the entrance into the conscious and subconscious in such a way as to avoid causing fear and to maximize the potential for an understandable subjective experience, which has meaning for the entity. Now check the words. I just think it's just beautiful. It's just, whew, this is a mystical experience for me. Check. When they say conscious and subconscious, okay, they're entering the conscious and subconscious in such a way, first, to avoid fear. Because when something unknown comes to us, we're usually afraid. So, I mean, the expertise, obviously, that these entities use, or this energy, let's just call it energy, uses, this intelligent energy, which we can call entities, come into our subconscious, are so refined as to not cause fear, because that is the Orion Group's tactic, and we'll get to that. So, for an understandable subjective experience, it's key. If you don't understand what's happening, then it's just going to be which some people actually have, and to me that is Orion Group or negative oriented, which is meant to confuse you. And subjective experience, again, remember when I said the mold, your subconscious is the mold for the shape that it's going to take? Well, that's a subjective experience, it's yours. Because you know, if you believe in elves, you'll see elves. And you have a propensity for it, like Terence McKenna used to see machine elves, you know, with his DMT experiences. And you know what? Terence McKenna didn't have to believe in elves, you know, as a belief system, but rather, you know, some sort of bias towards, you know, seeing elves, which is completely plausible. So that is the mold that is creating the shapes, images, and forms in your experience, in your mystical experience. All right, so many such occur in sleep, others in the midst of many activities during the waking hours. Like I said, you know, it could be, some people have reported to me that they were simply just like praying, or they went to church, or, you know, they were, somebody told me recently that they were about to give a speech about law, because she was a lawyer. She is a lawyer. And suddenly, it flashed on her something, unity, love, light, everything. And she started saying, you know, we are one, so no more injustice, and so on. Like, it's a beautiful speech. But see, these things are flooding our subconscious as long as there is permeability. And, you know, the permeability can be enhanced by you willfully seeking. You know, if you want the key to this, just seek. Seek and you shall find. So the approach is flexible and does not necessarily include the close encounter syndrome, as you're aware. So Ra, in a way, to me, is kind of guiding you to tell you, don't take it, you know, as a close encounter type of thing, you know, like UFOs landing and so on. More in this way. At least this is my interpretation. As always, if it resonates, hey, play with it. Don't even take it. Don't take it for granted. Just play with it. If it doesn't, then reject it. And let's move on. 5313. Ra says, actually not Ra, Don says, what about the physical examination syndrome? How does that relate to Wanderers and to Confederation in Orion context? Good question. Ra says, the subconscious expectations of entities cause the nature and detail of thought form experience offered by Confederation thought form entities. Thus, if a wanderer expects a physical examination, it will, perforce, be experienced with as little distortion towards alarm or discomfort as is allowable by the nature of the expectations of the subconscious distortions of the wanderer. Beautiful. Okay. So, what about the physical examination that was so commonplace experience in UFO contacts back in the 70s, 80s? You know, there was a lot of this. Let me just say something as well. Let me talk about statistics. In the close encounter syndrome, or the era of UFO contact, the vast majority of the experiences were positive. There were only a few people who obviously had negative contact. And, I mean, I don't have to convince you that the news are not interested in positive stuff. So they just took the negative ones and created, you know, this massive propaganda talking about UFOs and ETs coming, and of course, you know, the Twilight Zone took it on and all that, you know, all that jazz of the 80s. So, you know, there's there's something to be said about these experiences back in the 70s and 80s, or even 60s. And, you know, how things are always twisted by humanity. Those in the elite, of course, that control the information, because they don't want this stuff to be available. So it's understandable. That is just the paradigm in which we live. So, you see, people were sort of brainwashed with this idea. Maybe, I'm just going to make a scenario. Don't think this is real. Okay, I'm just going to make a parallel scenario for you to maybe visualize what was happening here. Imagine that somebody, for some reason, had the idea that if ETs existed, then they would do some physical examination on you. This was used by Orion to cause confusion, fear, and so on with the experience. And so they gave this impression. Now this person talked about it. The news picked it up and it broadcasted it, and now more people are associating ET contact with physical examination. But all of these people, the vast majority, are positive people who, you know, they're afraid of it, but, you know, that's what they're expecting from an ET contact. Now they have a mystical experience of this type, and their first trigger in their subconscious. Remember how I said their subconscious is molding our shapes and images and our experience in general. So they use this as a way to try to communicate to these positive beings, and I'm talking about the Confederation now, the positive contact of Confederation entities, positive energy flowing through the subconscious. But they have to take the form of physical examination. But why? Isn't that abridging free will, Gabe? No. In fact, this is conforming with free will, as Ross says here, because if the entity expects to see machine elves, then they should see machine elves. They shouldn't see, you know, clowns, which is another thing. Funny enough, a lot of people have clowns in there, and I'll give you some of the examples. Oh my god, I can talk about this for hours. So there is the expectation of the entity to perceive this experience in one way. And so the Confederation needs to oblige to that. And this is why we have experiences of physical examination that is positive, and it gives you a sense of, you know, they were sort of operating on me, they were improving me, they were upgrading me. There's a plethora of accounts of people talking about this stuff, which closely relates to one of the sources where I read a lot of this, and I mentioned in the last video that the similarity that Rick Strassman drew between the close encounter syndrome and the DMT induced mystical experience sort of thing that people had in his investigation, clinical study. So when he saw the similarities, he said, I actually, you know, am very compelled to say that they're one and the same. One is caused by exogenous DMT, meaning external DMT injected into the vein, as he did, and the other, the close encounter, is by endogenous DMT, which we do produce. Now, the reason why I'm so fascinated with Strassman's idea is because actually Strassman in the 90s speculated that the pineal gland produces DMT, and it wasn't until probably last year or 2 years ago, or 2022, so what year is it? I think it was 2-3 years ago that they actually corroborated. More than 20 years later, Strassman was right. The pineal gland produces DMT. And, you know, I mean, there's so much to talk about DMT here, but is this produced, you know, by the pineal gland causing an awakening, or is there a sort of energetic, mental, conscious inclination to feel this, and then that causes the DMT to be released? Who knows? Who cares? What happens is what happens. And what happened is that there's a similarity in between the two. And so a lot of people reported that in his study. They said, you know, physical examination, but I felt loved. I felt, you know, taken care. The entities wanted to talk to me, but they couldn't find a way to express all that they wanted to say. You know, and it's fascinating. If you're interested, go read that book, DMT, The Spirit Molecule. I've mentioned it a couple of times, Rick Strassman. So, with that now, we have in our diagram that obviously the conscious will of the entity is really what's making the experience. So, question 14. Oh, we have a lot to cover, man. Don says, well, are both those who are taking on Confederation and Orion craft then experiencing a seeming physical examination? Ra says, your query indicates incorrect thinking. The Orion group uses the physical examination as a means of terrifying the individual and causing it to feel the feelings of an advanced second density being, such as a laboratory animal. The sexual experiences of some are a subtype of this experience. The intent is to demonstrate the control of the Orion entities over the Terran inhabitant. The thought form experiences are subjective and, for the most part, do not occur in this density. So the incorrect assumption of Don here, now with the diagram that we have, is that well, first, Don says, are both those who are taken on Confederation and Orion craft and experiences a seeming physical examination? I don't find so much a relationship between the question, because Don is asking if both Confederation and Orion, again, you can see in Don's mentality that he was associating taking into a craft, which is something that didn't happen often. It was a very rare thing, but a lot of people expected that in their experience, in their subjective experience or expectations. And so, you know, they felt that. But in any case, what Ra is saying is that the Orion group uses the physical examination as a means of terrifying the individual, so the opposite of what the Confederation does, and causing it to feel the feelings of an advanced second density being, so basically an animal, a lab rat. The sexual experiences of some are a subtype of this experience, so people who have sexual experiences in this mystical experiences then are also part of the Orion group, because it's a way to dominate the entity. And I've actually heard this in videos of some YouTubers that talk about this stuff and how they had a sexual experience with like animal looking. Actually, it's interesting. I won't mention no names, but there is this YouTuber who mentioned this a couple of times, that in his trips with psychedelics, with mushrooms, he would have the sexual experiences, you know, with some entities. So, was it a positive or a negative? I don't know. But Ra is indicating here that the sexual experience of this type, that's something I've never had, actually. You know, I would have loved to, but no, I never had it. So I guess the Orion group is not interested in me. Bastards. So, the intent is to demonstrate the control of the Orion entities over the Terran inhabitants, which kind of makes sense. I mean, if you can terrify somebody, you know, give them that experience, then you can show them that you control them. If you can have, you know, a sort of sexual forced experience with the entity, then you're also doing that. The thought form experiences are subjective and for the most part do not occur in this density. To me, it's kind of a hint that Ra is saying, you know, it's not like you are taking aboard the craft and so on. And in any case, they're just saying that it's a subjective thing. It's energy flowing through you. You see how my diagram kind of works here? Because it's just energy flowing through your subconscious. It's nothing physical. I mean, the physical is a very human thing. Let me say something, which is an advice I always give to people when they ask me questions about something metaphysical and, you know, the perception of the universe. I say, and this is my view, of course, it's just my personal advice or suggestion. The more or the less you think as a human, the closer you may be to reality. And remember, humans think. That's their thing. You know, humans think. By thinking, we are segmenting things, we are dividing things, and we're separating ourselves. In other densities, the less you're separated, the more you are, you know, going up in the density. So, human thinking needs to go, you know, off the board. So, let's move on. Don says, question 15, then both Confederation and Orion contacts are being made, and close encounters are of a dual nature as I understand it. They can either be of the Confederation or Orion type of contact. Is this correct? Ra says, this is correct, although the preponderance of context is Orion oriented. Okay. Don says, question 16, we'll get back to that. Well, we have a large spectrum of entities on Earth with respect to harvestability, both positively oriented and negatively oriented. Would the Orion target on the ends of the spectrum, both positive and negatively oriented for contact? For Earth entities, I mean. Ra says, this query is somewhat difficult to accurately answer. However, we shall attempt to do so. The most typical approach of Orion entities is to choose what you might call the weaker-minded entity that it might suggest a greater amount of Orion philosophy to be disseminated. So let's make a pause here. There's more to say in this question, but I wanted to go back to Don asking if both the Confederation and Orion contacts are being made and close encounters are of a dual. I think it's due to Don insisting in the close encounter type of experience, not grasping, which obviously I don't blame him at all. not grasping the multiplicity, like Ross said, of possible contexts, and still talking about the close encounters. And they say, are these of a dual nature, as I understand it, meaning that, you know, it happens between Confederation and Orion, the close encounter type of thing. They can either be of the Confederation or Orion type of contact. And this is what Ross says. I mean, Ross is not saying that the majority of mystical experiences are caused by Orion-oriented entities, but rather that the close encounters are of a preponderance of contact by Orion group. Because we, I don't know if this is explained later, but I'm just going to say it here. You see, Confederation entities are much more advanced in their thought form projections. So even 4 density is super more advanced in thought form projection than negative ones. I think we talked about this a couple of sessions ago when we were talking about travel and how negative entities rely more on physical vehicles to travel, whereas positive being in 4 density rely more and refine themselves more into the disciplines of personality that allow you to travel. And in 5th density, you manifest yourself in whichever form you want because you're playing with intelligent energy already, and you know you are that. So this kind of merges itself well with what Ra is saying here, that, you know, the Orion contact as close encounters, physical, you know, craft coming here and so on, which is what Don keeps insisting on, is of course Orion and the Confederation. However, the Confederation does this too. I don't think it was Charlie Hickson, it was somebody else who was I don't like the word abducted, but this person, I forgot his name, was taken into a craft. I don't know if it was 2 people actually. In any case, you know, the Confederation has done this and is done with a thought form vehicle. They just take him out, you know, for a trip and have a good time. Which again, you know, it's the vast majority, but you know, this UFO contact is submerged in such a conspiracy theory and all this dark stuff that is completely unnecessary, and talking about, you know, how ETs have come here and they forced women to be, there's a lot that I think needs to be polished out of this ET contact. The vast majority of ETs are thought forms. So they're not real. They don't come here and have sex with women and impregnate them so they can have... it's... My God. Let me not extend myself here, because we have more from the raw contact. And so, okay, let me just reread this. Don said, we have large a large spectrum of entities on Earth with respect to harvestability, both positively oriented and negatively oriented, with the Orion target on the ends of this spectrum, both positive and negatively oriented for contact. So this is, I don't think this is the case. So Don was asking, you know, there's a spectrum of entities on Earth, you know, with respect to harvestability, like the really positive beings and the really negative beings. Is Orion targeting the really positive ones to suppress their light and contacting also the negative ones so they can impart their philosophy? I guess that's what Don was asking here. And Ross says this query is somewhat difficult to, you know, to answer. And they start with saying that the approach of Orion entities is to choose basically weaker-minded people that, you know, where they can disseminate this negative philosophy. So weaker-minded people to me sounds like people who are not very interested in, you know, the truth. They're sort of in the middle. They're not very, you know, into spirituality, and at the same time they're open to, you know, some sort of negativity and so it kind of opens a gateway for Orion to enter. I really don't know what to make up of the weaker-minded entity, as Ra says, but I would think it's something like that. Why? Because, say somebody who is, I don't know, let me take a yogi. A yogi is very unlikely to be contacted by Orion in this way. Take somebody who is the elite, you know, people who participate in these so-called satanic rituals, which is, to my view, you know, just spiritual rituals, negative ones that, you know, invoke. And this is why you see, especially now, you can see so much spilling out from the government and all these political figures, presidents, ex-presidents, and people from the banks and so on involved in these activities. It's not surprising. I think that information should be taken out of the, you know, the spooky thing that people do. At least that's my intention. You know, when you look this stuff up, there's always like, oh, look at what people are doing. They control your life. Yeah, they control not your life. That's stupid. Nobody controls your life. You are life. That sounds silly. But in a way, they control the system. And if you live in the system, then, I mean, they control the system where you live in. They don't control you. But, you know, that's how they got into power. This is what the Orion Group does. I was rereading today session 11, where they talk about the Orion Group to a certain extent. And, you know, it's stated there, you know, the Orion Group is interested in disseminating their philosophy so they can create an elite. And the elite is obvious here. That's, you know, I mean, nobody, even if you don't believe in conspiracy theories, it's obvious that there is an elite. And what is the elite about? Power, money, control, manipulation? I mean, we have all the items checks on the checklist of Orion, so 2 and 2, 2 plus 2, what is it equal to? Any case. So that's what the Orion Group would target. Weaker-minded entity to me sounds people who are... This could even be, you know, not even advanced, like wanderers. I mean, wanderers, weaker-minded wanderers? I don't think that's possible, because a wanderer has so much in their database. Like I said, you know, attracting this positive light that... I mean, they could, I guess, if their conscious attention and their subconscious is so distorted from their original beingness as a wanderer, that they may, you know, open some channels for the Orion Group. But to me, this just means, you know, people who are in the process of spiritual evolution and, you know, they don't have an interest and they're interested in, you know, mundane stuff and they don't care about people and so on. These are weaker-minded people. More towards orange ray, you know, animal survival behavior type of thing. We can speculate here a long time, but I don't think we're getting to any points, but just to know that Orion targets weaker-minded people. Ra says, and continues with this answer, some few Orion entities are called by more highly polarized negative entities of your time's space-time nexus. I'm sorry, I'll read that again. Some few Orion entities are called by more highly polarized negative entities of your space-time nexus. That makes sense, the elite. In this case, they share information just as we are now doing. However, this is a risk for the Orion entities due to the frequency with which the harvestable negative planetary entities then attempt to bid and order the Orion contact, just as these entities bid planetary negative contacts. The resulting struggle for mastery, if lost, is damaging to the polarity of the Orion Group. Oh my god, this is beautiful. I did not know we were here already. This is awesome. Alright, so this is what happens. This is the exchange between the true elite. This is why Orion Group doesn't target the yogi or targets too much. You know, they're kind of afraid of targeting the negative entities here. You'll see why. But why, Gabe? You know, they're 4 density. They're higher than the third ones. No. Nobody's higher than you, actually. Ra is not higher than us. They may have a higher perspective, but they're not higher than us in terms of, you know, how much can they impose on us. Even with law of one, you know, information, positive polarity, and so on. So the same thing happens with negative entities. Now, check this out. Ra says some few Orion entities are called by more highly polarized negative entities, so let's call this the elite. Those who are not even, you know, on TV, those that you won't watch or, you know, see in the streets. These are the ones orchestrating all the plans, demics. No, I'm just kidding. Those two. No, they're orchestrating everything, right? And you know, these are the ones calling some of the few Orion entities that want to come here. However, there is a risk of the Orion entities, the 4th, 5th density, to come and help them, basically, because due to the frequency with which the harvestable negative planetary entities attempt to bid and order the Orion contact. So basically, if they call them and the Orion entity comes, this negative entity is entitled to enslave that Orion entity to do his bidding. And so a struggle will begin between the possible fear that, say, Rasputin had in the past, right? 4th density negative harvestable entity, to enslave the 4th density entity. It's just fascinating how this works. So this is the struggle that's happening. See, the struggle for mastery can be damaging to the polarity of the Orion group, or to the Orion entity. They say Orion group, but I mean, yeah, if the Orion group depends, obviously it's like a sort of social memory complex, and they depend on all the entities, and some polarity is lost, then I think that guy is getting demoted. But that's what's happening. So that's why, you know, they don't like to contact the end of the spectrum, like Don was saying, in terms of Orion contact. Now, Ra says, similarly, a mistaken Orion contact with highly polarized positive entities can wreak havoc with Orion troops, unless these crusaders are able to depolarize the entity mistakenly contacted. This occurrence is almost unheard of. Therefore, the Orion group prefers to make physical contact only with the weaker-minded entity. So this puts it into perspective. If you're highly polarized towards the positive, chances are the Orion group doesn't want to risk it. If you're highly polarized towards the negative, then chances are the Orion group doesn't want to. One, because they're going to be enslaved, and the other one is because the yogi is just going to bathe them with love. The yogi is just going to say, like, hey, you know, thank you for all of this. You are such a beautiful being. And you know, they don't like that. They don't like to see themselves in a mirror of love. So this is another thing that I will throw in. This is something I tell my clients and other people that I talk to. Clients. It's just a figure of speech. The people I conversate with, you know, and in the hopes that they can, I don't know, elevate their consciousness, expand their consciousness. I tell them, listen, whenever you have those dreams, or that you see those shapes in the dark, or whatever it is that's, you know, bothering you, just bathe them in love, because it's you. Realize that that's you. Now, I mean, there's a lot to say about that, like how I approach it, depending on every, you know, person, but that's the key word. You know, it's you. If you can see yourself as the universe, nothing will bother you. Literally nothing. And yoga means that, union. So you and the universe are one. Boom. There you go. So that's why the Orion group doesn't mess with the ends of the spectrum and likes to go more to the weaker-minded people. Which again, to me, kind of validates the idea that these are people who are not They're mostly in the indifference. Ra coined a term that I like a lot that is called the sinkhole of indifference, which is where the majority of people on the planet are. So they're all susceptible to the Orion contact. That's how it is. And listen, we're trying to change that. We're trying to pull from one side of the spectrum by doing our introspective work. Anyhow, speaking of work, I got more to cover, a lot more for some reason. Wow. Okay, so Don says, then in general, I could say that if an individual has a close encounter with a UFO or any other type of experience that seems to be UFO related, he must look to the heart of the encounter and the effect upon him to determine whether it was Orion or Confederation contact. Is this correct? So Ra says this is correct. If there is fear and doom, the contact was quite likely of a negative nature. If the result is hope, friendly feelings, and the awakening of a positive feeling of purposeful service to others, the marks of Confederation contact are evident. Okay, so this is quite simple. Just want to reread when Don said, see, he continues to say close encounter. If an individual has close encounter with a UFO or any other type of experience, see, that was the key to open Ra to saying what they said. Any other type of experience that seems to be UFO related. See, now he opened up the umbrella as opposed to the close encounter type of thing that is just like restricted to a ship or a craft landing and taking somebody in, which is mostly Orion group. He must look to the heart of the encounter and the effect upon him to determine whether it was Orion. That's beautiful, yes. Well said, Don. And Ra says, yeah, that's exactly how it is. You know, if you feel positive, elevating, you know, one with the universe and all the positive content, you should know by now, then it is Confederation, and if not, then it is the Orion group. All right, we move on to a longer question from Don. Thank you. I did not wish to create the wrong impression with the material that we were including in Book 1, and find it necessary to add some of this material. I know that it's transient, but it, I believe, is necessary for a full understanding, or shall I say, a correct approach to the material. I'll ask a few questions here. If you do not care to answer them, we'll skip them. I would like to ask, however, if you could tell me what, for the most part, or the major portion of Confederation entities, what they look like. So, what do they look like, Confederation entities? Ra says, the 4th density Confederation entity looks variously depending upon the, shall we say, derivation of its physical vehicle. So let me read through this. Don says, do some of them look just like us? Could they pass for Earth people? Ra says, those of this nature are most often 5th density. Don says, I assume that the same answer would apply to the Orion group. Is this correct? As far as 4th and 5th density goes? Ra says, this is correct. I should call this the lightning round. Don and Ra. Don says, can you tell me why some name had so many silver flecks on her? Ra says, this is infringement. No. And before I get to the other one, which I think is longer, let me cover what we just talked about. So, how do the Confederation and Orion group entities look? Well, it depends on the density. You see, 3rd density, we look like humans, reptilians, avians, dolphins or fish, trees, whatever our 2nd density origin was. We are from primates, so that's why we have this beautiful body. I actually love the human body, just so beautiful. It's so elegant too, you know, it's just, I don't get people who said, well, I kind of understand when they say, oh no, I'm not from a monkey. They're thinking aesthetically. Monkeys are beautiful too. In any case, depending on your origin of 2nd density, you're going to look in 3rd density. Likewise, in 4th density, you're going to look something similar to that. And so, when Don asks, how do they look? Ra says basically, well, it depends on their origin, because they're going to continue to reflect that. You see, one interesting fact, I don't want to call it fact, one interesting extrapolation that I can make here is that as we become aware of ourselves and become aware of what we are, we need to shed our beliefs of what we are, you see? And that means you're not the human body. That means you're not a male or a female. That means you're not positive or negative, actually. Eventually, through the densities of consciousness, you're going to have to get rid of all this stuff to get to unity. Unity means no polarity. There's no division, no separation. See? And so, in 4 density, it's, for me, easy to extrapolate that 4 density beings still feel that their shape, their body shape, their beingness is shaped in this body. This is a belief that gets shed in 5th density as you gain wisdom. And so that's why Ra says that 4 density looks like their origin, because they're not really experts or proficients with their manipulation of energy. And I don't mean manipulation in the Orion meaning, but just manipulating energy, communicating with energy. This is achieved in 5th density. And this is why Ra says that from 5th density, yes, most 5th densities entities can look like humans because they can take that shape and form. Clearly they can. If they can shape their bodies, if they can move energy around, they can manifest that way. That's why when Ra came here, they sort of took the form that they were used to, maybe, you know, and they kind of look humanoids. So, but how did Ra look? I don't know. Some people say avians, other people say like mammals, feline type of cats, apparently they look like. Maybe that's why Egypt has the bird, the ibis, I think it is, and it has the cats. Who knows? But in any case, this is how entities from 4th and 5th density look. Depends on their origin, and it depends on their density. 6th density, of course, is already like pure light, so that's how they look. Let's go to the next question. Question 22. Don says, thank you. Could you tell me why I got sick during Karl Raschke's talk? Or Raschke's, I don't know. Ra says, we scan your thoughts. They are correct, and therefore we do not infringe by confirming them. The space-time of your allotted speaking was drawing near, and you came under Orion attack due to the great desire of some positively oriented entities to become aware of the law of one. This may be expected, especially when you are not in a group lending strength to each other. So Don was at somebody's lecture, Karl's lectures, is that what he said? Lecture? I don't want to put words where they're... His talk, lecture, same thing. So, why did I get sick? Well, because Orion attacked you in your weakness, and basically, you know, the attack was due to people wanting to hear the law of one. And of course, Don, I suppose, talked about the law of one, but this was the best Orion group could do to discourage him to do the talk. So, just like with Carla, they would pester her with her pain, arthritis, and so on, because Carla was so determined to do the contact that they couldn't deviate her mind, so they attacked her body and her weaknesses at that, which is the same here. They attacked Don's weakness in terms of his immune system. So, question 23, and this might be the last one. Yes, it is. Don says, thank you. Can you comment on my and the instrument if she approves so-called ball of lightning experience as a child? So this is something that is mentioned by Carla at the beginning of the commentary in book 5, and if you read in the website lawofone.info, You will see that information also in question 53. This is why I have it here too. So I'm going to read Carla's description of the ball of lightning, or lighting or lightning. What did I say? Lightning. Yes. All right. So Carla says, this is Carla. Just, this was not spoken. This was not raw. This is Carla. There's a note from Carla. I'm just making this very obvious. You can read that it's Carla there. So this is not raw. All right. So Carla said her account. When I was about 1 year old, I was sleeping in a cradle. And cradle or cradle, I'm not sure. That was placed at some distance from the open window. There was a storm going on. Mom came in to close the window. She saw a ball of lightning come into the room and circle around the cradle, I think, 1.5 times and then go out again. When I told the story to Don, he said that the same thing had happened to him when he was an infant. His mother didn't elaborate on it, so that's all he knew. So basically, Carla and Don had the same experience. And once again, if I didn't stress it enough, this is a note from Carla in the session, not what was spoken through Ra. Going back to Ra though, Ra says, this will be the last query of this working. You are being visited by your people to be wished well. Is there any other query of a brief nature we may answer? And from there, they go on to their classic Adonai type of thing. Don apologizes for making transient questions, but these were the questions that were included in book 1, session 26, where Don just wanted to make the close encounter more understandable. Remember, at this point they already had book 1 and 2, so he played with this, and it made sense not to give the wrong impression about close encounters. So the information was kind of missing in session 26. Don decided to do this, and that's why, if you have the original books, you can see the difference between the content in session 26 and he talked about Morris and all this stuff in that session, if I remember correctly. So yeah, that's why Don is apologizing at the end, saying, I'm sorry for making these transient questions and all that. Ra, as usual, says, chill out, all is good, go forward and rejoice in the power and the peace of the one infinite creator, Adonai, and all that. So, the ball of lightning, interesting stuff. These experiences, I think as children, we tend to get them a lot. Almost everybody has, child experiences, and this seems to indicate to me that there's more permeability, like I said, in the subconscious of the entity to get these experiences, to feel them. And this was a manifested one because the mother saw it, so maybe through the mother as well. I mean, it's a fascinating topic. But in any case, like Ross said, these experiences where your people's meaning, from their density. So their social memory complex manifested this to say, be well, just enjoy life, sort of thing. To wish you well on your journey as a human on planet Earth. So both Don and Carla, which to me, it seems to indicate, I know Ra mentioned like 2 of them were the same social memory complex. I think that was Don and Carla, to be fair. And they were the ones that had the student-teacher relationship. But who was the teacher? Was Carla teaching Don or Don Carla? Who knows? In any case, we get to the end of this video and the end of this session. Conclusions. I went on to explain how, to me, these experiences, these mystical experiences that we kind of called the close encounters, you see, the 80s type of phrase for these type of experiences. Just call it mystical experience, which can happen, you know, to different intensities, in different intensities. I believe that at the beginning, the first ones tend to be really intense, or could be really intense, and over time they kind of flatten out because you start living that energy more. If I can put it into a sort of scale so you can see the perceivable intensity. If you're accustomed to a low vibration before awakening and you have a mystical experience, then that would like really shoot up the graph of intensity and bring you back down to your low state of energy. But as you progress in your expansion of consciousness, which we can call spiritual evolution, it's not the proper term, but you can call it that too. Through the spiritual evolution, you expand your consciousness here. Then the intensity of a mystical experience tends to be perceivably less, but it really is the same intensity. It's just that you are able to, as they say, vibrate at a higher frequency. And so you're almost vibrating at that mystical experience. And this is why, you know, the more enlightened, it's a terrible word, I don't like that word because it's so misused. The more you're living your enlightenment, let's put it that way, everybody that can see, pierce the veil and see through the deception of separation into unity, to me, is an enlightened person. Now the question is, how much of your day is illuminated by this realization? It's fine. You know, we start always from I can see it, but I don't live it yet. You know, I can perceive it, but I don't get it. It's not part of my life. That's fine. It'll expand over time. And this is why I call the expansion of consciousness. Expansion of consciousness just creates more space, if you will, for light to be shown upon. So the more you are enlightened, now I can use the word and you can understand it within the context that I explain. The more your life is enlightened by your own enlightenment, by your own light. That is enlightenment. The more you do this, the more you can feel it, then the more mystical experiences would be the witnessing of a bird. It doesn't have to be a hawk or an eagle. It could be just a little bird, you know, just being there and you say, what a beautiful thing, you know, like what a majestic thing to be alive. So, you know, this is why mystical experiences vary, and it depends on the makeup of the individual. Let me throw in another. I just love these stories. Like, I watched a video recently of some guys who are, you know, going around into they're doing their thing, and they gave LSD to a yogi, and they said, you know, this is going to make your meditation, you know, brighter and all this stuff. And the yogi, being, you know, cool and all, he was just like, yeah, let me take it. So he took the LSD and he went to have, you know, his experience, and he came back and said, like, you know, yeah, it was nice, you know, but I don't need that to worship the creator the way I do. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that's exactly what he said. Basically, that he doesn't need that, you know, like he can incite that naturally. You see, chemicals or psychedelics in general, any substance, what it does is that it just alters your state. But if you can achieve that state on your own, then you don't need it. And so the same thing happens with mystical experiences, UFO contact, and all this stuff, close encounters. If you don't need them, and you just simply feel that way, then, you know, it's just going to be commonplace in your life. So what I'm trying to say here is keep bringing that unity that you know exists. I mean, I do this, to be honest, like I talked about this because I love talking about it. I just love talking about it. And my hope is always to throw at you tools, you know, or just parts, like parts for you to build your model. You know, I'm not trying to convince you into my view. I'm not trying to explain something to you. And this is why I say I interpret the law of one. I don't explain it. I don't think anybody can explain it. It's like, you know, taking Jesus' parables and say, I can explain it. You can interpret it, which is what the Bible has been doing, you know, for their own purposes. And hey, some people bought it. Good for them. In the same way, you know, you build your model, you know, do it yourself. DIY. And that's my purpose. At least that's my intention. And this overlaps well with the idea that if you can use this model that you're building of unity, and you can use it in your life every day, then that's what it's all about. You know, that's the deal, man. You know, it's just living the life, literally just living life. So I hope that was helpful. I really had a blast today, you know, explaining the way I see my diagram of, you know, manifestation of mystical experiences under the umbrella of all these reported experiences. Psychedelics, meditative, near-death experience, all of this goes under the same thing. It's just that energy flushing your subconscious and saying, be well, be happy, be in love, enjoy life. And with that, it's my way of saying thank you, thank you, thank you. For the people that support me on Patreon, thank you so much. For the people that support me here on YouTube with their likes and subscriptions and sharing it, thank you. That does a lot, and I appreciate it. And more importantly, that you are loved. That's all you need to know. That's all you need to care. Even the people that may express some sort of frustration with you, they're expressing their love in a way they can't put it into words. And that's just how it is. So that, I thank you once again. I'll see you in session 54.